Well, hello. Good afternoon. If I can. Well, now we can start. Hello and welcome to COP26 for Teaching for Climate Action in Schools Shaping the Future. This event is organized by the OECD, Education International, and UNESCO, who have together been gathering insights and expertise from teachers around the world on how they teach to empower young people to act and lead on climate. My name is Rodolfo Lassi. I am the Environment Director at the OECD. Welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure to moderate today's conversation with a cast of passionate and dedicated speakers who are here with me. And of course, they have a lot of experience across the education sector, and this event is recorded and live streamed. So we will have the opportunity to share some questions and answers with the audience here physically, but also virtually. Education's essential role in addressing climate change is too often overlooked, you know that. But schools have a key role to play for a sustainable future. Our future societies, our future habitats and behaviors, and ways of living, they all take root in the classrooms of today. Teachers have the capacity to be key agents of change in the fight against this climate change crisis. This is what led the OECD, UNESCO, and IEI to launch this campaign to gather teachers in initiatives and on teaching for climate action, because teachers from across the globe have been sharing how they empower their students for climate action through short videos and discussing key challenges on how to overcome with their peers this crisis, as I was explaining. This campaign is about capturing the tacit expertise of teachers when teaching for climate action and trying to provide more teachers and schools around the world with access to this expertise. It is also about empowering teachers and elevating their voice. Only teachers can share their expertise. You can find teachers' videos on the Global Teaching Insights platform that will be shared with you in the chat, and we will also get to watch some today together in these big screens, I suppose. Well, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Aldis Holst, who is Deputy Secretary General of Education International and a teacher by trade too. Well, your organization is the Global Federation of Education Unions, which represents 32.5 million teachers, amazing number of teachers, and of course, education support staff in 170 different countries. So welcome, all this. We are also joined here today by Stephanie Giannini, Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO. The United Nations lead agency on education, we all know that. Before being appointed in 2018, Stefania was the Italian Minister of Education, and prior to that spent 8 years as Director of the University for Forense in Perugia. No, that's very nice. No, it's a very nice place. I'm also delighted to welcome Larry Flanagan, General Secretary of the Educational Institute of Scotland and President of ETUCE, the European Region of Education International. Larry has also had a very long career in the classroom itself and has always maintained a close connection with this space of education. Finally, in our panel, we will be joined by my colleague, Andreas Schleicher, Director for Education and Skills at the OECD, who unfortunately could not be present with us today, as you can see, but who will join us via video during this event. Nevertheless, this event is not only about our speakers today, but it is also about all the teachers around the world who have contributed to the Teachers for Climate Action campaign, from sharing insightful videos to joining our series of online conversations. Sadly, we cannot have all these teachers join us here in this space. We have some restrictions, of course, but can still draw upon their ideas and hear their voices by playing some short extracts of their videos throughout our discussion. Remember that you can watch all the videos in the Global Teaching Insight site, the platform that it was created for this specific task. I therefore like to start by hearing what some teachers have to say about teaching for climate action in their classrooms and in schools. So we will see a short video.
By teaching about an issue as multifaceted as climate change, we show students that problems and systems are interrelated. And to solve them effectively, it requires competencies across all disciplines.
We all know that our schools and classrooms are busy places, in particular in the past year, and sometimes struggle to figure out how to engage in the complex topics around sustainability. And while they want to include these global issues in their content, they're also conscious of ensuring that they reference and include the information appropriately, and not just as another thing to learn. I was conscious of that curriculum overload, but also the potential to develop something practical for teachers and schools, which would start where they were at.
Ces élèves ont tous participé, lorsqu'ils étaient en classe de 5e, à un enseignement pratique interdisciplinaire sur le thème de l'alimentation durable, dans lequel de nombreuses disciplines étaient impliquées et sont toujours impliquées, puisque ce projet est reconduit tous les ans. Parmi les disciplines, il y a les sciences de la vie et de la terre, géographie, français, maths, physique et arts plastiques. Dans le cadre de ce projet, le chef de cuisine de la restauration scolaire et l'infirmière scolaire interviennent aussi, ainsi que des personnes extérieures à l'établissement, ce qui en fait un projet vraiment très complet. À la fin du projet, les élèves proposent un menu par classe qui prend en compte différents critères, dont l'impact sur le climat. Et ce menu est ensuite réalisé par l'équipe de la restauration scolaire et servi à la cantine.
Our initiatives revolve around an overarching theme called sustainable living, whereby climate action, conservation of flora and fauna, and sustainability are infused into the curriculum. They are also sharing by the experts in the field, hands-on activities, competitions, and projects organized, providing knowledge, generating awareness, and allowing students to participate. Besides acquiring knowledge, students are more mindful about waste and generation of waste. They are enthusiastic to lead climate action activities in class, rally their family members and friends to do so, and even extend their activities during the school holidays.
Surgió el gran problema que estamos teniendo, y es que las mascarillas se están acumulando y no se sabe qué hacer con ellas. Investigamos, porque una de las cosas principales en mi módulo es que los niños aprendan a investigar y a buscar soluciones, y la composición de las mascarillas, como bien sabéis, es básicamente plástico. Esto había que acabarlo, estuvimos haciendo un montón de pruebas, por eso que algo muy importante que hay que transmitir a nuestros alumnos es que las cosas no se consiguen a la primera, todo lleva su tiempo, pero con el método científico y siendo rigurosos podemos encontrar soluciones. Y así lo hicimos.
An educator like me who is keen to teach environmental education and to influence or to empower students to take climate action, I say first start with finding like-minded educators and teachers around you or within your school community to help you pursue this together.
自然に対して何をしてどのように協力していくか子どもたちは見ています。数年後には大人になる子どもたち、力を合わせるかどうか一人一人が判断していきます。自然を身近な大切なものと捉え、働きかける積極性を持ち、いろいろな人と連携していくことができると自信を持つ子に育てることが私の考える気候変動教育です。
Okay, these short extracts showcase the potential of education. Aldis, I wonder if you could tell us what you see as the potential of education when it comes to the climate crisis, and whether you think the crucial role of teachers is fully understood.
No, it's not
No.
fully understood. That is the short answer. But to go back, I'm so inspired by these videos, and I would encourage everyone to go in and watch them. They really speak to my teacher's heart. And just some of the things that we heard here, they make it very clear that teaching about climate change is not just about knowledge. It's not transferring knowledge. I think it was Nita that said it in the first video. It's about competence. And to get to the level of competence, you need to also know how to act on the knowledge that you receive. And you saw all these videos, they were doing. They were not just listening or reading, they were doing. And that is part of finding out what can I do with the knowledge, how can I act? And the beautiful one from Anna from Spain, where you're using the new kind of waste we now have during the pandemic, the face masks, and transforming it, recycling it, transforming it into something new. I'd love to be in that classroom with those students, the conversations they've had, the process they've had to come there, because it's not just making something, it's the whole learning process that goes on. So this shows us that you need to trust the professional autonomy of teachers and their knowledge to transform a curriculum that needs to be there, that mandates you to teach it, that they, in dialogue with students, are the experts of transforming this from a sentence in the curriculum to real-life learning and empowering of students on the ground, bottom-up. So yes, they are important, and I wish everyone would watch them, because you can't deny it when you've watched those videos.
Yes, indeed. Well, we are not simply talking about knowledge here. We also talk about the behaviors and skills, as you were explaining, Aldis. And I'd like to share here the thoughts of Andreas Schleiner, who is my colleague, and I feel this is an important point.
Well, what we learned from the OECD Programme for International Student Assessment, or PISA, is that students' environmental awareness often goes hand in hand with their depths of scientific understanding. We started to look at students' understanding of climate issues back in 2006. And at that time, fewer than 1 in 5 15-year-olds in the OECD area could properly explain issues around climate change or the environment. Just, 1 in 10 could, make use of evidence to compare and differentiate among competing scientific explanations. But what was actually most striking was that students with poorer knowledge and skills around environmental science, they often had an almost naive optimism that the climate challenge is going to go away sort of magically in the future. Stronger knowledge strengthened our trust in a common, shared and objective reality, and enables students to realistically assess the magnitude of the climate agenda ahead of us. That's why a solid, education and science is one of the best investments the society can make into the future of the planet. But it's not just about supporting a generation of climate literate citizens. It is also becoming increasingly clear that the future demands that we substantially change individual and also collective behavior. And that we find a better balance between situational values, I will do whatever a situation allows me to do, and sustainable values that help people see both the present and the future, and that generate trust, hope, social bonds. That's why cultivating healthy, green mindsets and also ways of living very early on is so important. We must focus on fostering that student agency. As we saw in the video with Benny and Anna just now, in which students recycled waste, and the classrooms can be places where students don't just, absorb knowledge around, climate change, but they can become spaces that transform how students live and interact with those issues. And keep in mind that the demands on education will keep evolving. Let's hope that today's school graduates will aim for green jobs to build the technologies that will drive down carbon dioxide emissions. And let's hope that today's children in kindergarten will grow up in a world with electric cars and carbon capture technologies. And by the time these kindergarten children are adults, we should have reached net zero. But assuming we do, these children will face entirely new challenges. Throughout their lives, they'll need to adapt to extreme weather conditions and natural events, and they need the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes and values to be ready for that. The point is, we need to educate students for their future, not our past.
Well, thank you, Andreas. And in our conversation on teaching, 80% of attendees felt that teaching for climate action is important for all subjects and teachers. There are some great examples that you can see in our Global Teaching Insights platform. And we are now sharing the website that you can see perhaps in the chat. If not, later we can provide more information about this platform. But Stefania, why do we need to further support these interdisciplinary and whole school approaches? And furthermore, what do schools need to drive this further?
Good afternoon, first of all. Great to see you and to be here in person. I think we start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And great to have also Andreas connected and leveraging technology in order to, valorize this movement we are building, because it's about that. This is the second side event at COP26, which is focusing on the importance of education, the importance now of teaching and teachers in order to make the change, the big change, the dramatic change we need possible. And I think the whole school approach that UNESCO is promoting is very much part of the solution. As these teachers, I join Haldis in feeling really very much touched by their live, telling us what they are doing, not only what they are teaching about, are really very much important for us to understand that it's not climate education, climate literacy, a nice to have, in addition to all the other topics that schools and teachers in the school are teaching. And it's not about simply the knowledge that children must have, but it's a whole process to run. And it starts with content, of course, pedagogies, and climate education, we do believe, must be included as a core part of the curriculum. We have some good news and some bad news from the survey that UNESCO just released this week. Out of 100 countries, almost half of them don't include education for climate in their curriculum. So there is a huge work to do. On the other side, from the teacher's perspective, we already discussed with colleagues before, it's very nice to see, it's very important to see that 90% of teachers we survey say, yes, it's crucial, it's essential to teach, to include climate education and these topics in the school programs. However, only 20% feel and feel comfortable and ready to go when it's about teaching and transmitting to children the way they must have to their own contribution to change to address climate change. And this is about behaviors. It's not about simply transmission of knowledge. So teachers are critical. Some keywords I remember from Valerie maybe from Ireland: respect, care. This is the century where care is the key word. We have to see that taking care is the title of what we are discussing here in this COP26, and this the title of our joint program about education for sustainable development. And we see teachers are very much on top of that. Then, of course, it's not only about that. It's not only promoting a roadmap globally. It's not only giving guidance to governments, which is an important part of the job you are doing as international organization and UNESCO, leading this process. But it's very much about teachers giving the tools, starting with the pre-service teaching and in-service training. It's about organizing the school process, the schooling in a different way. It has to do with facilities. It has to do with the governance of the school. It has to do with involving communities and having an open school in addressing these topics. So it's about managing complexity, but of course what we are discussing here is a big change, which has to do, let me conclude this first round, recalling the chain of values that Education for Sustainable Development is bringing out. Knowledge, awareness, action. And this is about changing behaviors. Changing behaviors is not simply and crucially a collective responsibility, it's also an individual different approach to the small things that every day we are doing. And about that, of course, a good teacher, a well-prepared teacher in the classroom is a very, very first important step. So we are very happy to join and be in partner in crime with Education International and OECD about that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Stefania. One thing that is emerging here is the role of collaboration. I'd love to hear from you, Larry. You have worked very closely with a range of communities of teachers. What does professional collaboration around climate education look like for you?
I think, well, firstly, colleagues, welcome to Glasgow, my home city. The school I taught in is a short walk from here, so this is a very real connection with the classroom. I think collaboration is critical to how we actually engage young people nowadays. And not just in climate education, but across all curriculum subjects. And it is a big change. In 1979, when I became a teacher, you walked into your classroom, you closed the door, and you were on your own. And you only saw colleagues at the breaks. Now the pattern has changed. We collaborate because we know that this is more effective in nurturing young people and having a whole school approach. And I think in terms of climate education, it's perhaps even more critical. And just to build on the point, that what we don't want is one or two people who are active on climate education. We have in Scottish schools often what's called a climate champion, so a kind of designated teacher who takes the lead. But we don't need individual superheroes. We need all teachers to be engaged so that climate education is not 1 hour a week. We're doing climate education, but actually all the time in the classroom, all the subjects we have embedded. And young people see the connection. They see the connection between science and home economics. They see the connection between English and geography. And I think collaborative practice It's what enables that joining up, that connection. And all of that means that young people develop the inquisitiveness, they develop the interrogation skills, and they can arrive at their own conclusions because we have empowered them to think through the topic, and collaboration, I think, is the key to that.
Thank you very much, Larry. Yes, it's a cross-cutting topic, and we have to have a comprehensive view of the topic. Otherwise, we will not be able to understand what's going on in the planet. Okay, I think it is time to hear from the audience. We are asking you out to tell us in the chat, if you were a world leader, how would you change education to empower climate action? That is a question. But I'd like to stay with this theme of the future, and where we go now, if we are remained, how teaching and learning can be future ready. What are the concrete next steps that education ministers should consider in your opinion? I'm going to invite you to hear from Andreas Schleicher, who can't join us directly, but who I spoke to previously. So, can you put Andreas' video, please?
Well, you know, the most tempting thing for ministers to do is to redesign and adjust the school curriculum, because that's the easiest thing to do. And of course, it's very important. But according to PISA, 9 out of 10 school leaders say that climate change is already covered in their curriculum. And when we surveyed students, also here, the vast majority of students told us how important and urgent the climate agenda is for them. The real challenge is that many students feel they can't do anything about this. Our school systems do a good job in building student awareness, but they often fail when it comes to helping students develop their agency through which they can, mobilize their cognitive, social, emotional resources to take action. So I would start at the other end, the learning experiences, the learning environments, the classroom practices. The most important thing is often not to push a new curriculum top-down into schools, but to start with finding the best practices in today's classrooms and see how to leverage and scale them to make them systemic across schools, across school systems. And this campaign here shows so many really inspiring classrooms. What policy can do is to build a supportive ecosystem around them, like our OECD Global Teaching Insights initiative does. We need environments where teachers can safely, effectively, and collaboratively innovate pedagogy. Teaching for climate action must be agile and evolving, and that relies on a strong teaching profession that can grow and develop, always in step with rapidly changing demands. And it's equally important to codify this expertise as it surfaces, to build well-organized, teacher-led repositories of works where teachers can find ideas and inspiration. So back to your question of what ministers can do. Well, to achieve transformative change, don't ask yourself how many of your staff support your new curriculum. Ask yourself how well your teachers and school leaders can collaborate around innovative and effective classroom practice. What matters is to be transparent with teachers and school leaders about where change in education is heading and what that actually means for them. To be acutely aware how organizational policies and practices can either facilitate or inhibit that transformation. To tackle the institutional structures that are too often built around the interests and habits of adults rather than those of learners. And to use power and influence to build alliances and coalitions that are needed to help, rules become good practice and good practice to become culture. I know none of this is easy and none of this will be done overnight, but real change often happens in deep crisis. So let's use this moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andreas, for those insights and joining us remotely. Let me turn to you, Stefania, with the same question. What do you see as the next concrete steps for the education ministers looking to spur action? You have the experience.
Yeah. I have the experience. I can tell you something about, but I do agree with Andreas about, looking at this process as a step by step. So first step, and most importantly, what we are keeping in the global roadmap, greening curriculum, so to say. So we have to call governments, not only ministers of education, I underscore this point, governments, to take their own ownership, their own responsibility to include climate education and education for sustainable development at the core of their programs. Since the very, very first step, the early childhood to university level. I already mentioned numbers we had from this last recently released survey. There is a lot of work to do about that. Andrea said it's the easiest step. I mean, it's almost right. I mean, it's not so easy to change curriculum, I can tell you, but you can do that. It's maybe something that ministers of education can start to design within their ministries. The second, more complex but very much needed step, in my opinion, is greening schools. I mean, this whole school approach is about that. It's about changing the learning environment. It's about involving communities. It's about changing the governance of schools. And this is a more complicated discussion. It's possible to do, but it requires a permanent strategic dialogue, first of all, between the two critical ministries involved on this topic, education and environment. That's why at this COP at 4 p.m. we'll have the very first meeting of Ministers of Education and Ministers of Environment convened by UNESCO, co-organized with the UK presidency of COP26 and the Italian presidency of G20 and partner in this COP. And they will commit to make this job together. Because I can tell you that if you don't have a joint action on this issue, I mean, it will be simply 2 hours more in the school schedule, and it's not enough. Then the last point, it's about mobilizing funds and political will on this issue. Let me say in a very simple way, I think we'll get it when in the plenary of COP20 27 or maybe later, I don't know, we'll have education for sustainable development as a main topic. And when we'll hear from leaders of the world to address climate change through education, in education. It didn't happen, I suppose. I heard some of the main speeches in the plenary, and I think that nobody mentioned education. So education for climate change is not a side event topic, and we are very happy to organize side events on that. But once we'll have education as part of the solution to address climate change in a very structural way, I think we can say, well, the last step will be done, and we are very much keen to promote this big change needed.
Thank you very much, Stefania. I remember in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 that one of the conclusions of that summit was to teach young girls how the environment works, to give them the freedom to know, to understand, and to act. That was one of the conclusions in Rio de Janeiro. It is true that we have to have some conclusions or some recommendations or some really resolutions about the climate education here.
So back to the future to have
of course, of course, we have to. Now let me turn to Aldis, because you came here with the voices of educators, with the experience from educators, and also the feelings from educators, so, and demands. What are the next steps for you that are priority steps?
Well, in many ways, the next steps for us are the same as Andreas has talked about and Stefania has talked about, because we first need the political commitment. We need the pledge from governments, and that has to be real. It can't just be a pledge that you do while you're at a meeting and then you go home and forget about it. And then, of course, the next step is, if you haven't started on it, you have to start on mobilizing the experts on curriculum to revise your curriculum. And I think I agree with Andreas that in comparison, that's the easy part, because that can be done when the go-ahead has been given. But nothing is going to happen until you take the third step. And that is about the practitioners, those that are actually going to put this reform into life in the classroom. And that's where we most often go wrong on all informs. It's about focusing on implementation, implementation, implementation. And implementation here is about the teachers. So you need to make sure that your teachers are able to implement, all the teachers. Here I very much agree with Larry. Yes, you can train specialized teachers that can be sort of the go-to or a mentor or something like that, but it's never going to be a cross-cutting subject or transversal if you don't make sure that you educate all teachers, because it is a way of thinking, it is a way of acting, it underlies all the other subjects that you're going to teach. So you have to reform your teacher training programs. And you have to have a massive professional development program for those that already are in practice. But you can't do this top-down either. So my major point is that you have to do this in cooperation with those that you're going to train, with the teachers and with their unions. Do it in dialogue. They actually have a lot to bring to the table. Look at the videos. They're not incompetent. They know what they're talking about, and they can bring something to the table to revise it.
Yeah, indeed. Larry, do you have the last participation here?
Thank you. And I was really intrigued by your question, if you were a world leader. So I don't know what's in the chat, and I'm not a world leader, but if I was, I would trust teachers. I would put teachers in charge, because I think then the practitioners would realise the ambition around climate education. And if we wanted to look at more practical steps, then I think we have to ensure that climate education is embedded in our curriculum structures, so there is a green light there for practitioners in terms of taking this agenda forward. I think we have to invest in teachers so that they have the knowledge and skills to empower young people. In Scotland, most teachers have degree qualifications and then a postgraduate qualification. But I'll guarantee you, the degree content of their courses says very little about climate education. So let's not assume that teachers have all of the knowledge. We have to enable that knowledge to be gained in order for it to impact in the classroom. And then my last point is to reiterate my first point. We have to empower teachers. We have to give them agency so that they can then give young people the same agency and empowerment, develop the skills that are needed to go forward. And I think if we can do that, if we look at our curriculum, if we invest in our teachers, and if we give teacher agency a free rein, then we are looking at a brighter future.
Indeed, yes. Well, now it is time to open the floor to the audience. Yes, please. Do you have a question? I can take one question.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shantanu. I come from India, and I represent the Brahma Kumaris Spiritual University. My question is to Stefania especially. I like the word you said, care is the word for the century. With the growing climate anxiety amongst young people, old people, everyone, is there a way that you see to incorporate well-being, to incorporate the wisdom and power of indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge into the curriculum, because it has been always subsided? And the world is now coming back to that point where they are starting recognizing that it is important. Because if it is empty inside, no matter how much knowledge you gain from your books, it doesn't help. We have been having the knowledge, the science, the money, the power, but still we couldn't move because there wasn't will, which comes from ethics. which comes from values. So do you think you have a plan to incorporate such programs in the education system that helps to build and prepare people to fight and become independent towards anxiety and issues like that?
We have enough time to take another question, and later the answers from the panel.
Thank you. My name is Lucy Aldersloe. I'm a permaculture educator and representing children in permaculture. I also really liked the care statement there. Care is the key word this century. My book that I wrote is Earth Care, People Care, and Fair Share in Education. Yeah. So I was really heartened by that. I would redesign the whole education system around earth care at its heart, and keeping like nature connection embedded in everything that we're doing. With the younger children talking about climate change like under 10 is too much. It's too abstract, it's too difficult, but they can understand to love a squirrel or a tree. And starting with that and the ethics, you know, that love and that care is essential. So grounds, in my ideal world, would be full of biodiversity, rather than that small nature garden in the corner. Buildings would demonstrate what a low carbon environment is. So every school would have renewable energy generation that the children would be reading and monitoring all the time. The pedagogy is really essential as well, and is about valuing nature at its core. Of course, the curriculum as well, which you've already talked about, and educating all teachers. And I'm working with teachers at the moment, and as you say, they are experts in their field. In Scotland, it's coming to a question.
Please.
In Scotland, we have a unique opportunity at the moment, because we're merging the Scottish Qualifications Authority. And we could reimagine how young people spend their final years in school. At the moment, there is such a focus on individualism, on competition, on each child getting the qualification that will get them into university better than their colleagues, their classmates, their friends. And this is, this is the question, is how do we accredit cooperation and earth care through the reimagining of the SQA?
It is evident that we have teachers here because they explain the background of their questions. Please, the reaction from the panelists. Stefania?
So thank you. Thanks for recalling this word. I really care so much by definition. I mean, playing on words. And well, yes, I do believe it's possible. I joined UNESCO, by the way, because of that, because it's the organization that since the establishment 75 years ago, actually this year, we are celebrating the anniversary next week in Paris, is about that. It's about making cultural diversity as the very, very core principle to implement all the agenda. And then, of course, there are different steps in history. So it's about a tireless effort of advocacy on this perspective. It's about promoting and discussing with member states, I mean governments, leaders, but not only in a top-down approach. You mentioned indigenous knowledge. I mean, at UNESCO, I want to refer to a topic I was dealing with before taking this position in my career as a linguist. The notion of language as a human right and the notion of linguistic diversity as an important tool to also about learning and teaching, but generally speaking, is a UNESCO achievement, so to say, in the global debate. So as as there is a movement around these values. Of course, I mentioned UNESCO leading this platform, this agenda, but with all partners. No, we are here today, and we are very much keen to make things happen on the ground. I think it's possible. I also see, honestly, some obstacles, for sure. I already mentioned before, I mean, it's a bit surprising that, as you recall, Rodolfo, in 1992, the conclusion of Rio Summit was about, putting teaching education and education at the very core, and in Glasgow, I mean, we are developing a nice conversation, and we are doing things on education, but still the plenary was focusing on something else. So I think there is a lot of work to do still. And then the second question was about, sorry,
I'll try to address some of it, and I'm sure Larry can also comment on it. If I may say two words about Indigenous peoples, I'm so happy that you raised it, because I think we now have a golden opportunity. And if we look at the positives, there are so many Indigenous peoples around the world that have been told that their knowledge isn't valuable, and that have not had it integrated in the education of their children. Now is the time that we actually can say that they are the experts and tap into that knowledge. And every country that's so lucky that they have Indigenous peoples and communities have that opportunity to tap into it bottom up, and I really hope they do it. Thank you for raising it, very important. I cannot comment on Scotland. I'll let Larry do that. But I think you've made very many points on approaching, and yes, maybe someplace you need to totally reform your schools and systems, but there are also good practices to build on that are already there. I've myself taught in a school where we had an outdoor classroom every week, 1 day a week. We were outdoors all day. Early childhood institutions that spend 90% of their time outdoors. And it's about letting children experience the world and planet they're living on, and that's how they build knowledge from the reality around them. So I think there does also exist good practice. I don't know if there's any on the Insights videos, but maybe we should have some of them.
Yeah, thank you. I think two really good questions. So on the values issue, so not just looking at Indigenous people, but I think all education systems have to be based upon values. And here in Scotland, I'm a registered teacher, and my professional standards begin not with reference to my competency, but to the values that as a teacher I subscribe to. And learning for sustainability is profiled there. So I think values are absolutely critical for any education system. And on the specifics of Scotland, just to broaden out the answer, one of the things we learned during the pandemic was the important role of outdoor education, teaching in the outdoors. And I think Scotland has much to learn there. We have a natural landscape for doing it. But if you look at the Scandinavian countries, they are much further down that road. So I think we do need to look at how we think beyond the classroom in terms of the learning environment of young people, because that does inculcate, a sense of nature, a sense of wonder, a sense of inquiry. And on your last point, I'll not deal specifically with the SQA because nobody will know what we're talking about. But you made the point about the upper end of secondary school being about competition, and it kind of echoes the values point. We need to have, we need to have cooperation rather than competition. We need to have collegiality rather than conflict, and all of that is about how we nurture the young citizens that we want our teenagers to be, and education cannot simply be about qualifications for university. It has to have a much broader agenda, and climate education and the values that young people, in Glasgow today there are thousands of young people marching to the city centre demonstrating that they care passionately about this, that they have a sense of value, and I think it's our duty as educators to nurture that in the best way possible for a better future.
Thank you very much, Larry. Well, we have to conclude. And if you are a teacher or school leader, we invite you really to share with us your initiatives and perhaps also your experiences. You can send us an email, you can send us a video, and we have this Global Teaching Insights platform. I'm seeing one of the teachers here raising their hand insistently. Let me go with him and ask you what is perhaps your question to, your answer, not your question, to these questions that I would like to pose to all of you here and in the platform. What can you do to support teachers and schools in teaching for climate action and ultimately for a future and better future? If you can give us a quick answer, perhaps you can stimulate others to give us some answers in the platform.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Javed Gilani. I'm from Pakistan. So I am a social scientist actually, and I work with the school children, the deprived, the poorest of the poor. The first thing I would say, according to that, we need to treat the teacher, the student, and the parents heart of this. Okay, one thing is that, and the second thing is, we already discussed. If knowledge is there, and if awareness is not there created for these main stakeholders, so you are going to get nothing. The last thing is I would touch with the action planning. So one thing is the commitment you see from the government, single national curricula, integrated the environmental issues and the motivation for the students and the teachers and all the stakeholders and the parents. And the second thing, which the schools and the public sector and private sector can do, within their yearly planning. You see the co-curricular activities, which the exposure that the students can learn more and take it to the communities, to their parents, and across to create more awareness. So within the yearly activities, you can embed a lot of things, taking environment as a key, okay, and creating. And one thing which I would see, this faith. Faith is a big incentive. If we bring in and integrate different faiths, if you study all the faith, they see environment at the top. Only in Islam you see, they say, in Islam only they say 50% of the religion is environment, is the cleanliness, is to protect yourself and others. Thank you.
No, thank you. There is another intervention here. We have 1 minute, in less than 1 minute, please,
Okay.
because we need to conclude.
No problems. So I help teachers. I come from the Climate Frisk NGO.
Oh, yes, I know you.
And we help teachers by providing them with a very accessible, scalable tool to teach climate change in schools, in universities, and I've personally trained teachers. They absolutely love this tool, and it's really, really accessible. It's based on IPCC reports. We've already reached over 240,000 people all over the world. The workshop, the game, is translated into 35 languages, and we're really looking to reach the whole world. And I know that this really works with teachers. The teachers absolutely love it. So I invite you to come and discover the Climate Frisk.
And thank you for coming here. Well, share your experience, your expertise with your peers, because if there is one thing that stands out today, is that education has an enormous role to play beyond COP26, 27, 28. So it is our duty to do that. But fulfilling this potential relies on the work of all of us, really. That means teachers around the world, but also the school leaders, support staff and teacher educators that support them, the organizations and partners that seek to empower and support them, and the communities, the parents, like one of our colleagues here said, which can orientate themselves around school and its work. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts and your feelings. And well, we are expecting a very good outcomes from COP26, and education must be part of them. Thank you. Bye-bye.